Okay, hello everyone. This is FIDE Master Victor Neustroev. So thank you for joining. This time I conduct this workshop from Spain. So I successfully moved from Argentina to Spain. So I've been I'm going to stay there. I mean here in Valencia for a while. So if there is anybody from Valencia or cities that are very close to Valencia, we can meet, of course, in person. Maybe play chess, play some blitz games over the board. That would be great. So, what our topic is today? Today, we're going to talk about conversion of your advantage. So, how to realize your advantage. Let's say you have a winning position, or let's say you have some advantage, how to convert it to a winning position, to a technically winning position. So, that's our task. Okay, so at the workshop, if you are for the first time at this event, if you're okay, so if you attend my workshop for the first time, please introduce yourself a little. Tell me what's your elo. So it can be chess.com rating, national rating, Lichess rating, anything, and which country you are joining us. Can I increase my volume? Yes, sure. That's a good point. Let me increase my volume. That's right. Okay, just a sec. It's here. Okay, so I know what was the problem. I was just using the wrong microphone. Is it better now? Okay, fine. Yes, thank you. Okay, we have, well, Zamfir from Romania joins us, I don't know for how many years, maybe for a few years. Zamfir always often attends our classes. Pietro Garofali is Italian chess player and with FIDE rating more than 2000. Very good. That's perfect. Okay, if the sound is okay, let's start. Yeah, I'm just checking if all the settings are really well placed. Uh, Bernice is from Kenya. His FIDE is 1590. Okay, still a very good result. So we have 17 participants. So Samir, I thought you only have a national rating, so USCF. So it's USCF 1700, right? 1770. Okay, perfect. But I think the difference between American national rating and FIDE rating is very slow. I think that FIDE probably is like 100 behind. Like if you are 1760 or 1770 in the United States, so FIDE maybe 1670 or so. Or sometimes they are equal. Okay, perfect. So what we're gonna work on? We're gonna work on how to convert your advantage here. Look at this position and tell me who is better. Well, probably because black pieces are on the bottom and the white pieces are above, we should analyze this position for black. And that already tells us that black may be better. Well, okay, maybe, but what's the main factor that tells us that black is better? So first, when you're trying to convert your advantage, you should understand what exact advantage you have. And to answer such question, Well, sometimes it's hard because your advantage consists of several factors, and you have to accumulate it and come up with a plan which allows you to increase advantage using these factors, or maybe transform your advantage to a different form of advantage that is easier for you to realize. So here Dan suggests that black has the control over the d file. I absolutely agree. So the knight on d3 is very annoying because it stops our invasion. Black pieces are more active. That's right. So overall speaking, yes, black pieces are more active. The d file, this knight is better placed. This knight is annoying. And it seems that the next plan that black should continue with should be related to pieces maneuvering. What do you think? Which piece we need to improve in this position? Obviously, the knight on f6. So this knight is well placed. The rooks are where they should be. There is only one open file. There is a queen which can potentially go there that supports a5. So the queen cannot be improved, but the knight on f6 requires improvement. The bishop, yes, the bishop requires improvement too, but I don't see a better square. If we can reach d4 with the bishop, it's nice, but I don't think so. So the next move is knight h5 in order to achieve f4, because that's not only how we improve the knight, this is how we get rid of the knight on d3 in order to take advantage of our main benefit. Two rooks on this d file and better pieces placement. Yeah, we can bring the bishop to g5, makes sense. So the game continued with knight e2. They stopped us from doing it. Such move like g3, let's say, is possible, but weakens their position. So, for example, if g3 already played, I don't know, maybe it's time for knight d4, and after, let's say, bishop takes, knight takes, there will be a idea of sacrificing the knight. I'm not saying it works, but it might work. So, for example, knight d4, bishop takes, pawn takes, knight e2, and, well, sacrificing fails this time. But we can play c5, c4, and create a pass pawn. So we convert our pieces activity to a pass pawn. But they played knight e2 in the game, preventing us from playing f4. What did change in the position? So every time when some actions were made, ask yourself, how did the position change? For example, the knight from c3 went to e2. What does it mean for us? Well, that means that the knight no longer can go to d5. So we can successfully advance the pawn and drive this knight away and then either invade the enemy camp or occupy the f4 square. In order to stop it, white continued with b3. Well, they could retreat with the knight, of course, but then knight f4 would work. So b3, and black still plays that move. So after a mass trade, the position changed, and you now see a significant improvement. It's easier for black to come up with a plan because the position becomes more open, the d file is open, and this bishop can get improved. So c3. Yes, this diagonal now plays a very important role. How to continue? So c3 on the one hand closes the bishop activity, but still activating the bishop makes a lot of sense. And after that, rook d3 and white is in trouble. They can probably start with this move. They can defend with this move, but after b6, it's hard to suggest a move. While black has a lot of moves that can improve their position. So queen e5, and on the next move they are ready to take. Pushing c4 means losing there. Bishop e1 should be played, but these pieces are really passive. I think c4 already makes sense. Or let's start with a5 first and then do c4. So queen b6 can be tried at which moment? Queen d6 maybe. Instead of pawn to b6. Okay, queen b6 taking there. Then b4 is a bit problematic for us because we cannot take. So, well, okay, so maybe instead we should provoke them to defend it with the bishop and then play queen b6. What about queen e5? Yes, I like queen e5, but after the mass exchange, I don't want to lose this pawn. So it is required to be protected with b6 or, I don't know, somehow else. Queen a5. Okay, so where we are. Queen a5 here. But I don't know, bishop e1 and then they can play b4. Okay, so queen e5 was played. After bishop d2. Okay. Anyway, let's continue. So bishop f6 wasn't played. It started with queen e5. Rook c2. b6. Queen e1. So they defended that way. And instead of queen b6, we can play queen e6, which also attacks such a pawn. And there is no c4 because they lose there. So they played queen b1 in order to defend, bishop here, and how to play. On the one hand, bishop e1 can be played, right? But if this move is played, how would you continue? Rook d1, rook d1, queen b2. And I still like c4 move here. The c4, b4, and the second rook goes that way, and it's a disaster. So they cannot play this. Bishop d2. Black should be still winning. Well, actually, this is the right moment to play g5, and step by step you increase your advantage. So after you create an escape square for the king, there can be tactics with bishop c3. Anyway, so let's see what happened in the game. b4, after which we played c4 to fix this pawn. So when you want to capture weaknesses, you should first fix them and then attack. So queen c1, g5 as a plan makes sense, but yeah, so mainly to defend the 4. And if let's say they continue with h3, now Okay, bishop e5 makes a lot of sense. Please tell me if the sound is better now. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, bishop e5. Yes. So Pietro, you are absolutely correct. So bishop e5 with the idea to support, and then h4, h5, g4. That makes sense because you protect there, and you also very mobile with your queen. You can bring it to the king side. Aha, so the idea of a rook sacrifice exists, but you should well calculate it because once they move the bishop, they can support the king side with the rook. So, yeah, but it only works if you already open the position because just one move and the bishop and rook comes to g2. Okay, so they first of all they played queen e1. Why so? Well, to have any counterplay, maybe to invade the black's camp here, but h5, a5, and g4. Takes. So how to play? In the game, they continued with bishop h4. But let's say they play something like queen a6. How would we respond against such a move? G takes f3. Okay, this is what Dan suggested. But then queen b6. No, queen h3, you sacrifice the queen. You cannot play so. So g3 instead makes more sense because bishop b6 is a blunder. After that, there is a pin that they cannot unpin. So you win a bishop. Queen takes b6, you take on g2. King takes g2. Queen h3. Okay, and if they, let's say, continue with a random move, you take on h3 anyway. Oh, yeah, it works. Yes, you're right. So g takes f3. Yes, if this you take, yeah, that's a winning position. This is where this rook transfer works. I choose the third rook, because I don't want to get any intermediate checks. But I think that it still works. Okay, fine. So queen a6 fails. That's why bishop h4 was played. And after bishop h4, just f6. Cementing the bishop on e5, restricting the bishop on h4. And they trying to defend the position with bishop a1. Well, g takes h3 works or not? What do you think? Okay, let's king h7 first or h8, right? h7. Yeah, okay, let's agree that this is one of these two moves. Yes, I think this makes more sense because if you take on h3, you may experience issues after that move. Because now you cannot place your rook queen on the g file, you are pinned. With the king on h1, it makes more sense. Oh, this check is still unavailable. So you lose on h5, so it may be not winning. Queen e6. If they take on h5 immediately, well, they can just move the king and then play rook g1 and rook h5. Now it seems that white overtakes initiative, so you should be very accurate with g takes h3. You provide your opponent with some counterplay. Let's finish this game without any adventures. So, well, I often see that some of my students, for example, when I analyze their games at the individual classes, I see that they take a lot of risk. And instead of just finishing the game in their favor, without complications, without any troubles. They try to sharpen the position because they got used to win games in tactics. Well, if you have advantage and you believe this advantage is sufficient to call it a winning game, what you should do is to play not the best moves, but the most solid moves, which do not allow your opponent to initiate any counterplay. That's why g takes h3 is too risky. Maybe it's a good move too. And after that, you can continue with king h7, or you can continue with king h7 first, and then g takes h3. But can you win keeping your advantage and getting a more safe plan for black? Okay, so John again suggested g3 the second time. Let's check it out. Maybe g3 works. Rook a3. Okay, Brian, what's the purpose of rook a3? To bring the second rook to the place of action. Okay, makes sense. Makes sense. But g3 works too. You can do rook e3 later. g3 makes this bishop absolutely passive. And if the bishop doesn't move, then the rook doesn't participate in the game. So these pieces are stuck. And what you have to do now is to switch to the queen side with your pieces and realize your material advantage. For the rest of the game, you have extra bishop and extra rook. No, well, okay, maybe the bishop on e1 supports something, but the rook is not participating in the game, so you're at least a rook up. So move your pieces to the queen side. The position is cemented on the king side, and they cannot do anything, so just this. Queen c6. Now rook e8 traps the queen, so they have to retreat back. b5, again, a move to cement. Now you can try this and use the a file to invade the enemy camp. So queen b2, check. King moves, and rook d1, so pinning the bishop. Now it's winning. You don't even need the a file. They played rook c1. So how should we play in this position? No, queen e3, exactly. So queen e3 should be played. Now what? Rook takes rook, but then they cannot defend the bishop. So rook a1, yes, but still rook takes rook, queen takes, and after queen e2, they cannot defend it. So they can do what? They can play rook g1, or they can play king g1. If they play king g1, it's rook d1. It's actually the same. So it's rook d1, and then we take the bishop. They have checks, but the king escapes. Well, they played rook g1. Rook d1, queen moves, and what black needs is just to get rid of the checks. Obviously, the king can go to h4, where it is well hidden from checks. So this is exactly what happened in the game, after which white resigned. So even queen e1 with a tempo to threaten to take on g1 was mate. But rook e1 was good enough. So the king escaped, and that's it. I don't know why, but white decided to try queen g3. However, it makes no sense, and then they lost. So this is how the game ended. Okay, which techniques did we use in this game in order to realize our advantage? So first of all, what did we do? We're trying to understand because of what our position is better. What is that main factor that tells us that we should play for win in this position? And in this exact position, the main factor was the piece's activity. For example, two rooks on the d file doubled with the idea of invasion, the knight, which is well placed, and we saw that one of our pieces requires improvement. As well as we found the second problem that we should somehow solve is the enemy knight on d3, which stops us from the invasion. However, we can hardly push c5 right away because of these or that complications. That's why we first try to either distract this knight by trading it or chase it away with c5. So finally, we did it and opened the diagonal for our pieces, as for the bishop and the queen, as well as the file for the rook, which finally provoked a weakness on c3. Now, when enemy pieces are tied down to this weakness, we started the second part of the plan, a kingside attack. So white has more space, and it's easier for white to transfer pieces from one side to the other side. So that's why we can change the place of action and now start playing on the king side, because our pieces are more mobile, they are more likely to go there. So we did that. And then we should either play king h7 and prepare g takes h3 or something like that, or we should push g3. So in this game, black decided to push g3 to get these pieces stuck, and then finally invaded into the enemy camp and took advantage of extra rook, because technically it's extra rook, the f rook doesn't participate. This is how the game ended. So first of all, understand what kind of advantage you have and how you can increase this type of advantage. Then think maybe you can convert this type of advantage to a different type which is easy to realize for you. Always remember, if it's a space advantage, playing on two sides on the board and changing the place of action from one side to the other side is likely to favor you, because your pieces are more mobile, you have more space. This is how it works. Okay, let's continue. Our next example. What kind of advantage white has in this exact case? It's white to move. White is obviously better. I'm sure you understand it. But why? And how to realize this advantage? So please let me know what you think. Okay, Zamfir suggests bringing the second rook and then g4. So probably this, maybe that. Oops. Rook f1, sorry, rook f1, rook f3, and then g4. Okay, so that's the plan, but Zamfir didn't answer what was our advantage. Brian did. The knight is on e5 is a strong knight. Capturing it makes the pawn structure better for white. We can take with the f pawn, I think. Yes, that's true. So white can bring the rook to f1. Like king is weaker, but you must understand the way. King h1, rook g1. Sounds like a plan, yes. Rook g1 and then g4. What I don't like are these complications, when the enemy bishop from b7 can somehow attack our king on h1. So it's not possible when there is a pawn, but they can get rid of this pawn by tactical means. There is c3 to protect the pawn. Yes, I understand, but maybe they can attack e5 and sacrifice something on e5 and then push d4. Okay, well, I'm sure rook f1 is the best move. So the main advantage of white in this position is their kingside attack, the ability to attack the king. How to win because of this attack? You should keep attacking the king. If you have an opportunity to attack the king, you should do it. Very likely, it's the best plan. However, you have to see whether the preconditions of your attack are met. And in this position, they are met. What we have? The knight in the center, like Brian says, and capturing it improves our prospects for the kingside attack. We have already the rook there. The bishop is potentially looking there, and the other rook is ready to join, and our queen. While the enemy bishop is out of the place of action, the rook doesn't participate, so it's very likely that white can succeed with such an attack. For example, rook f1, queen e8, then what? Rook f3. Now they can take on e5, we take on e5, and then bishop h6 and d6 can be played at least. What else? g4, not sure. Maybe rook g3 and then g4. g4 instead of rook f3, maybe. But you'll see in the game, white decided that they don't need rook f1. They will join the rook later. They started with g4, which makes sense too. How does it work? So this opening the king is a disaster for black. Now king h1 and rook g1 and then knight g6 or so. The king is in trouble. So they must take. They could actually, there is one more thing that they could do. They could take there, and after f takes e5, they could push f4. That could slow down the white's attack. For example, bishop d2, bishop c8, f3. No, f3 is not a threat. Rook f3. I don't know. Well, let's say queen g2 and queen d7, bishop e2, defending on g4. And they could try c5. And this is how they could have some potential counterplay. But white is still fine. In the game, it was the most logical move. F takes g4. And what then? Take with a knight, take with a queen, maybe take on g6 even. Okay, so let's wait. Let's wait for more suggestions. I see what you are writing in the chat. Okay, so take with a queen. Well, if you take with a queen, they take on e5. And then they try to trade queens. However, I don't think it's possible because we can push e6 and after rook f6, f5. So it's still fine for us. Let's go back. Queen g4 works. Knight g4, probably not bad. But rook h7. So, okay, so Brian also suggested bishop g6. Bishop g6, I think they take our rook or they take the bishop. If the rook, it's queen h5. Okay, the bishop. Yeah, the bishop. And if knight g6, they take the rook. It's not winning. Okay, so rook h7. How does it work? If king h7, which is natural, it's queen g4. And the problem is that g6 is attacked several times. So, for example, knight e5 doesn't change anything. It's still this, and this is hanging. They should defend it. How? Definitely not with rook g8, because if they do it with rook g8, there is a check here. King moves. Check there, right? Ah, no, then king h8 and we are pinned. No, that's a wrong move. That's a wrong check. Okay, then which check? Bishop h6 or queen h6? Oh, bishop h6. Let it be bishop h6. Well, king f7, rook f1, king moves, and queen g4. For example, something like that. Not 100% sure. If he goes there, it can be just queen f3. And if king g7, it's still queen g4 or queen h3. Okay, so rook g8 fails. I think there is a better way to play, actually. I think we can start with rook f1 and then continue with queen h5 at the very next move. Yeah, I like it better. It also threatens with rook f7. So I think rook f1 is a winning move. Well, they both are winning moves, but rook f1 is better. Okay, so if they try to defend it with queen e8, which makes more sense because the queen defends g6 and the king has a lot of squares, you can still win. So queen h6, king goes to g8. If this move, queen g6 is made. So king goes to g8, bishop g6, and you threaten mate as well as you threaten the queen. However, rook f7. So who can tell me how to finish this this attack in your favor? Rook f1 doesn't work. Unfortunately, e6 is suggested. e6 failed because of the same move that they can play. So neither e6 nor rook f1. There is something you're missing with both these moves. It's easy to miss it. So when you attack and you already sacrifice, you should be very accurate. So e6 or rook f1, both moves fail because of one. Yeah, because of one reaction. So king h1, yes, Georgios and Manish are correct. King h1 should be played first. Let me explain why, because it seems natural. Rook g7, they pin it. And you don't have a bishop move, so you just lose a bishop at the very next move. Or you have to take there and then pass the game to this endgame, which is losing because black has a bishop more. Same thing with rook f1, rook g7. That's why king h1 first, and then you either take on f7 or play rook g1. And right now there is no this move because you win the queen. Fine. So what did happen in the game? They didn't take immediately, they decided to trade knights first and then they took. But there is still a problem. So queen e8 loses because of the same strategy, queen h5 and so on. So rook g8, queen h5, king g7. I think that rook f1 is a better move. Yeah, rook f1, this is what we discussed. So rook g7, for example. And here you win if you do what? Bishop takes g6, rook takes g6, rook f7. This is what Samir wants. So this, and then this. Yeah, it's winning. So bishop g6, king g8, let's say. And if no, bishop. You mean rook f7? Well, okay, bishop f7 is a check. He cannot take it, but he can play this move or that move. Yeah, now bishop h6 doesn't work. So rook f7. Oh, this is what Brian suggested. Okay, let's see. So how they should play? Maybe take it. Is there a checkmate? Yeah, there is. So this. Yeah, there is. It's a similar position that we gonna see later. I think that's the best way to play with rook f7 right away. Then queen g6 becomes a real threat. And if rook f7, bishop g6, king goes there, bishop f7, king takes, and yes, this is winning. e6, so they cannot move. This falls under this. If king e8, it's queen g6, queen f7 mate. So king f6, bishop g5, and then we can win the queen at least. So the game continued with queen h5, king g7, queen h6, king this, rook g7 fails. Rook g7, you can play that move. And after king f8, it's rook f1 or bishop h6, like what you like most. So that's why the king. Uh-huh. 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 Yeah, then what? King h8, queen takes. Ah, there is queen g8 move. Yeah, it fails. It fails. Queen h5, the queen it's pinned. So bishop g6. Yeah, bishop g6, king g8 works too. So when bishop h6? After king g8? Maybe something like. No. Bishop g5. I wanted to play bishop g5. Okay, but I can try queen here or bishop here. What is better? E6 works. Bishop f7 works. Yeah, bishop f7 works, right? Yeah, bishop f7 is even better. Yeah, okay, bishop h6. Yeah, it's winning. Okay, so that's why they have to take. And then after rook f7, it's king h8, so it's not winning because after queen g6 they have a queen straight. So that's why instead rook f7 should be played. Yes. It's a pin. Okay. Fine. So yeah, rook f7, rook g7, rook f7 is the best. Fine. In the game, it was queen h5, queen h6, another check. So king goes to e6, and after that, it's almost game over. The king doesn't escape, so he goes that way. Check. The king goes to e8, and in this position, what do you think is the main queen? Queen h7. But what if king d7? You don't have bishop f5. Uh-huh. Queen e6 is better than e6 because with queen e6 you attack. Maybe with e6 you win too, but queen e6 creates a threat. And this is a blunder because of bishop g6. This is exactly what happened, actually. Ah, no. So this is a blunder because you can play like that. King is... Oh, bishop g6, right. Bishop g6 works. So that's why they played this move. And now bishop g6, rook g6. So it's not completely winning. That's why they played this move, bishop g5. I think it works too. Uh-huh. Should be a winning position after trade. You are pawn up. Rook. Oh, nice. I didn't see it. Then queen d7. Right. Nice. I was calculating this move to capture the second pawn. But it seems that what Brian suggested is several times better. Bishop b5? No, c6. Okay, so anyway, bishop g5 was played. Queen d7 was played too, and then rook f8 works. No, not this time. Bishop g6 works. So if king moves, then rook f8 leads to checkmate because the bishop is pinned. So that's why they took. Queen takes, and then it's a checkmate after rook f8. Like that. This is how the game ended. However, what I want you to remember about about when you have the attack in your games. That your task is not obligatory to deliver a brilliant checkmate and then post your game somewhere in your social network. Your task is to finish the game and win without any chances for your opponent to overtake initiative. That's why strong chess players don't often checkmate. Instead, they allow their opponent to defend the position at the cost of material losses. And then they just pass the game to the end game with material advantage, which is easy to convert. So if you don't see checkmate, don't try to checkmate. Win material, and that is enough. Convert one form of advantage to the other form of advantage, which is easier to realize technically. Because if it's a permanent advantage, like I don't know, like extra exchange, a bishop pair, extra pawn, extra piece, it's much easier. The plan is very easy. Simplify, pass the game to the end game, create a pass pawn, and win the game. If you have a dynamic advantage, for example, initiative or kingside attack, then you have to act rapidly to not lose momentum. So that's why, for example, if you have the attack, you should be attacking. You should make moves that either create threats or have potentially hidden threats behind these moves. Okay, fine. So how to convert the attack? Just keep attacking, keep creating threats, and most likely your opponent makes a mistake. Let's take a look at the position when you have extra material. It's queen versus rook and bishop. Yes. Do we have to calculate every single variation? Only in case if we sacrifice. If we don't sacrifice, we don't have to calculate everything. But a sacrifice should be well calculated. Because if the sacrifice doesn't work and you are mistaken somewhere, you're gonna play the endgame without material and very likely you may lose. So in the attack, only sacrifices should be calculated properly. Just playing, just doing the attack slowly, bringing pieces, creating a breakthrough that do not consist of sacrifices. They can be done with some calculation, not every single line. Don't waste time on calculating. You may need this time for a more concrete position when there is a direct confrontation, when the position is too sharp and you are forced to make forcing moves or you provoke your opponent to make forcing moves. So this is where you need calculation. And of course, yes, it depends on the time control. No, I'm not a fan of intuitive sacrifices. So do you mean that you should, well, okay, so when you should stop the analysis? When you believe it's a winning position, or at least you win material back. So at some moment, you may say, okay, the king just doesn't survive because he is separated from his other army, and you can bring your pieces and checkmate. So if you understand it, you don't need to calculate to the very end. You just need to evaluate the position. But it's really hard. So for 2000 player, I think it's possible. For 1500 player, it's better to finish the analysis. I mean, finish the calculation process. Because these sacrifices, when you just have to understand whether your positional compensation is sufficient for a piece or not, it's really tough. But 2000 player can do it. So yes, and if you know the pattern, then you can play it without calculation. Yes, okay, fine. Let's continue. Our next example, the game where white has a queen versus rook and bishop. So it's advantages. It's a material advantage, but the position is so closed. But it's a queen, and the queen is stronger than the rook and bishop, of course. The queen is sometimes stronger than two rooks even. What do you think? How this time you should convert this type of advantage? In which case your queen... So bishop f3 to trade, right? And what if they avoid a trade? I don't know. So, okay. I don't think they will blunder on d6. So how will they play? Let's decide. Maybe. Bishop f8 is a candidate move too, yes. I don't, well, okay, so one common mistakes that chess players usually make. When you have material advantage, I always say exchange pieces. And you shouldn't follow it blindly. I mean, you should initiate these exchanges which favor you. For example, trading the bishop for the knight isn't a good trade. Bishops are better. Trading the knight for a knight is okay. Trading the knight for a bishop is good too. So trade pieces, but these trades, these exchanges shouldn't make your position worse. So make favorable exchanges, right? So don't make well, bishop for a knight trade. Well, if you had extra queen for free, then yes, bishop takes knight is still okay. But when they have almost sufficient compensation, then you'd better look for a better strategy. So, okay, the first and the most important stage when you have advantage is to realize what kind of advantage you have and how can you increase this type of advantage. So here you have a queen versus something, and it's a material advantage. So how can you increase your advantage? Okay, Brian, so you are thinking in the right direction, but there is something else you're missing. Something else regarding the queen you're missing. In which case queen is stronger. So you have the queen, your opponent doesn't have the queen. Okay, Pietro thinks that we should do the attack. Okay, Brian? Right, right. Not obligatory in the open position, but when the king is compromised. So the queen increases her power when the enemy king is compromised. So, for example, if you attended one of my webinars when I was comparing queen versus two rooks, I was explaining these situations. Well, usually queen is equal to two rooks, but two rooks are stronger when it comes to the passed pawns. Two rooks can successfully support the passed pawn and stop the enemy passed pawn. The queen is stronger than two rooks when the queen can do the attack. So that's why what you should be doing in this position is knight takes e6, sacrificing the knight to increase the power of the queen. Well, you can do it in a different way. You can play bishop g4 too. So, well, they probably defend it. Then bishop e6. So it still works. And then rook d1, increasing pressure. So, for example, we can continue. Knight e3, they're threatening here, and the rook, of course. Rook d3. Rook c3 means you can capture here. Ah, yes, good point. If they take, just take the rook and deliver checkmate on the back rank, right? So probably they have to defend, attack. Yeah, right. So now if they decide to take, you should be winning. Actually, you'll see, same thing happened in the game. You'll see how. So knight e6, pawn takes, queen takes, king moves away, and rook d1 to activate the rook. The queen alone can do a lot, but not win the game. So rook d7 is a threat. Knight e3, rook d7 anyway. So with every move, white increases their advantage. For example, something like queen f7 would tie enemy pieces down, and the bishop is already hanging, so bishop d5 is a must. How would you play? Queen e7, that was played in the game. Not the very best move, the very best was this, to take advantage of the back rank. But queen e7 works similar. So they should defend with rook g8, but they played knight f5, and that allowed us to trade rooks. They could take, or they can play bishop g8 right away. It's similar. Because after queen e8, we provoke them to take anyway. So rook d5. So now you may see that actually they have a sufficient compensation. If you just compare the material, what is it? It's rook, bishop, knight versus queen and two pawns. So sufficient. But white queen is more active and black pieces are passive. That's why white is winning. So queen e8, and what is our winning plan? Bishop c4, of course. So queen c8 with bishop c4, yeah, but queen c8, they can play rook c5 back. So it's better to play like that. Well, yes, queen c8 first, rook c5. So yeah, bishop c4 is the plan. That's why they need somehow to defend it. In the game, they played this move, but let's discuss what would happen in case if rook c5, for example, is played. So g4, right? Knight goes to, I think, h6. And how would you progress? Bishop d1 would work, right? And then bishop b3. Maybe you don't have to rush and first let's play c4 because it's hard to suggest a good move. It's almost like a Zugzwang. As for such move as e6, I don't want to open the enemy bishop, not yet. I want to do this. So actually, maybe instead I can bring the king to e4 and push f5 at some point. Because I just see that the pieces are stuck. c4 stops the rook activity. Okay, fine. So the game continued with g5, which I think was a mistake. Bishop c4, check, king f2. Now they have to defend there, and they decided to do it with knight e7 move. If they did knight h6, g takes with a check, and still there is a problem. You can try a check, but who cares? So they played knight e7. So if queen e7, it's bishop c4. That's why my question is how to play. So g5 was a move that made the position completely losing. It was already losing, but with g5 it's losing faster. What's the purpose of bishop b3? Oh, it's interesting. So bishop b3, and then you want to take here because the bishop is protected. I think they would deliver a check, but then you can play king e3, and the rook is hanging now. So this, this. I'm not sure if it's sufficient. Maybe. So rook h2. And queen e8 wins the game. Okay, fine. Yeah, it's winning. So in the game it was f5 because these pieces cannot move. Because if bishop e5, it's queen e7. And if they take there, it's queen e5. So what to play? f6 is the threat. Bishop takes g8, knight takes g8, and then f6 is also a threat with f7 and so on. So they play knight d5, but okay, tell me the next move. Yes, it works. So everything works actually. The next move was actually g4, and it's hard to suggest a good move for black in this position. But the simplest way was just to push f6. Yeah. So how do they play? If they take here, you take there, and you threaten checkmate. If they take with a bishop, which makes more sense because then knight captures, it's still losing, just queen f8, and they have no ideas of how to defend it. So rook d6, actually rook d6, queen d6, knight e4 works. But after rook d6, we can first take on g8 and then take the rook. Okay, fine. So what your task was to realize, when you have material advantage, yes, you should trade pieces. When you have material imbalances, for example, a queen for something, try to make your queen more active and the enemy king compromised. That is the key, because the queen becomes stronger if she doesn't attack. I'm not saying sacrifice blindly, but here with 96, at least you're playing the position with equal material. And because your queen becomes stronger, you have a positional advantage anyway. So that's why such a sacrifice doesn't require much calculation. Okay, fine. And finally, we have the last game to analyze. But before we continue with this last example, so let me remind you that our workshops are free. However, if you enjoy this content and you would like to support me, you can do it through PayPal or Wise. For example, using this link. Let me type it here in the chat. How does it work? You click the button donate, the pop-up window appears, you enter the amount you want to donate, it can be any amount. Then you click PayPal, it redirects you to enter your PayPal account, and after that, the money are automatically delivered to my account. I would appreciate any help. The second way is Wise. So my username here is this one, Victor N394. So you can just use this link. You can enter your PayPal, your Wise account, and then enter this link. And this is how it works. Okay, so what else? If you're looking for individual classes, you can always message me at tricksofchess@gmail.com. Let me type it here. Soon I will announce group sessions on Friday. So I want to start at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time so that Europeans can also join and it's not too late. It's late, but not too late. Fine. So let's continue with our last example. Okay, so let's take a look at this position. What can you say about that? why black is better? First of all, I should say that black is not much better, just a little better. And try to explain what this advantage is based on. Mhm. So pieces activity, yes, and I would say that it's a lag in development. So the pawn structure, yes, especially that the pawns are doubled. In certain conditions, black can take advantage of it. Should we point king's safety? I don't think so. Only some ideas of something like rook d2 or rook d3, which does a fork, but now it doesn't work and it's very unlikely to work. But at some point we can exploit it. So king's activity or king's safety in the endgame doesn't matter much because black doesn't have enough resources to successfully attack the king. What are the white's advantages, please, Manish? Okay, so the semi-open file and potential pressure on f7, as well as the center control. Well, I will say yes if the rook was already there and the pawn was already on e5. But right, it like a kind of a potential advantage that white may, if black plays stupidly, white may do this with rook f2, rook f1, with a pressure on f7. Yeah, so, well, of course. So you should understand, if you play moves that makes no sense, you just waste tempi and you allow your opponent to improve his position. Okay, fine. Mm, so what did we decide? Black is better because of their pieces activity and the lag in the white's development, as well as pawn structure. However, black shouldn't waste time. What plan would you suggest for black to play for a win? Yeah, that's right. So c5, knight c6. So they should play c5 right away. Because if d takes c5, these two pawns are doubled and isolated. As well as the rook can invade d3 and white faces with material losses. So c5 was played. What should white continue with? Maybe rook c1 was a good move. You can still go knight c6, but your pawn is pinned. You lose the knight then. Yeah, the bishop protects it, but you cannot take on d4. You lose the knight then. What are you talking about? If you take here, you lose your knight. This is... Yeah, you can do rook c8, so, but it's now their turn. If they do that, you have rook c d3, and after rook c3, trying to defend both pawns, you can pin it. Do you mean that we should c1, knight c6? That's... Mm, Okay, okay, fine. Yeah, okay. King f2 can be played, I think, and rook a c8 is a must, but then still rook d3 works. How? Rook c3, rook c3, rook c3, rook d1 still. Rook d1 and then rook cd8, okay? Because if you don't do it, you let him trade and develop. Ah, no, they cannot develop. They probably gonna play rook a2. Okay, fine. So rook c1 was the best way. The game it was a4 played. So c takes d4. Well, they could take with the bishop, but then the pawns are still isolated, and the bishop is the object of the attack. And I don't think it's a good position. Look at this, at these firewoods. All these pawns can be taken. Well, at least two of them. So that's why they took with a pawn. Knight c6 with a pressure and rook d5 defending. So what did black do in order to improve or increase their advantage? They opened the position and joined the rest of their pieces to the place of action, keeping these pieces still passive. The game continued with rook b8, threatening with this. So knight c3, knight c3, knight d4, or rook d4, and then knight b3 works. So that's why they took. However, then this pawn is a weakness. The only, well, knight d2 fails because you can always take and win a pawn. That's why rook d3. So you see, black activates their pieces, but still doesn't allow white to improve their pieces on the queen side. Okay, what now? I don't see any immediate win, and this is where we should come up with a plan. Knight e5. Okay, we can play knight e5, and they have to play rook e3, rook c3, rook c3, rook c3, rook d4, rook c8, rook d8. No. No, it seems I have to. Ah, I can just play rook c7, rook c8, rook d8. Doesn't work. So rook c7, two pieces are hanging, because doing that allows me doing this, protecting the rook. So rook c7 is the key move. Okay, fine. So rook c3, knight e5, rook c3 works, and then the knight is hanging. So probably what? The knight should go further. What does it allow me to do? Knight e3 with a tempo. Because knight e3 this time works. If bishop a3, it's rook a3, and this pawn is not hanging because of the back rank. Yes, knight e5 doesn't look like the most accurate move. Knight d4. In which case knight d4? So knight d4 doesn't work because they can take with a rook. So bishop f6 makes more sense, right? What do you expect? Yeah, you threaten to take the pawn on d4, so but they can develop their pieces. Samir? Rook a4. Yeah, rook a4 is also a defensive move, but I like this more than knight c4 or knight c2. Attacking and defensive. No, it seems bishop f6 is not enough. Take on d4? No, you cannot. The rook is hanging. Rook b4. Uh-huh. Yeah, just let me see. Maybe knight c2 is a better move. Knight c, rook back. Okay, let's do like what Samir suggested. And then a5 is hanging always. And the back rank is weak. So bishop d4. Knight a5. Even. So because this, that, and I'm threatening the rook and the back rank. So takes rook a5. It's a draw. Most likely. Okay, fine. So bishop f6 doesn't look good, and it's hard to, well, rook a4 is a possible move after bishop f6, but black plays f5, creating the second, the second place of action, I will say. e5 is a blunder, so they must, e5, just knight e5 or rook e5, they must take. Rook takes, and rook f8 becomes a threat. Knight d2, now rook f8 means rook f1, and the rook's gonna be traded, which black prefers to avoid. So he does rook back, attacking it. And this is where white made a mistake. They could try knight c4 and try to convert this pawn for this pawn. However, they played rook e3, trying to win the pawn on e6. That was a mistake, which, how did black realize such a mistake? Knight d4, no, I don't think it works. Yeah, e5. So knight d4, bishop d4, rook d4, knight. No, a c4 is better. Two pawns are hanging. So, but yes, just e5. Knight c4 now. So if we take, they take there. No. If we take, they're gonna play rook e6, and we have some issues. We cannot move the knight because the bishop is hanging. Okay, so bishop b4. No, there is a better move. Bishop g5 with a tempo, because rook e5 doesn't work. So they played rook e4, and now it takes d4. And now we have a pass pawn. They still tried this, but after knight b4, they can of course take on a5, but then who stops the pawn? So let me show you. So this, let's take, knight takes, and how do they stop the pawn? That's why rook d1. So what did we do? By this trade, we created, we actually won the pawn, and this pawn became a pass pawn. What our next task is to advance it. But if we advance it right away, we activate the enemy bishop. Still not bad, but it's better to play this and trade there, and then advance it, and maybe then win the pawn on b3. So the game continued with king f3 and rook b5, attacking the weakness. They have to play rook d3 now. Can you find the next move? King f7. Don't you hang anything? Or rook d6? I don't know if king f works, so let's say rook f5. Okay, so what David suggested was better. Just a4, take advantage of a pin. You may say that there is no pin because the bishop is protected. There is. You can just do this, and then you are threatening to take on c4. And if the knight moves, you take on b2. And if they protect, there is another feature, a fork. So a4 works. Here they play h4, bishop f6, king moves, but with 2 pawns you are completely winning here. So the rest is just pure technique. Well, we can go back and check what Brian suggested with rook f5, but I don't see how it works. Then what? Knight e3? No, you cannot play knight e3 because this is hanging. And this rook is alone if you take here with a bishop. Bishop e3 works. No. Let's see. So this double the rooks. So something like h5, but something like h5 means king h3. So you're trying to checkmate, but it seems that the king has enough safe squares, and you're gonna lose on d4, I think. So after knight takes, it's knight e1, in which position? After bishop e3, did we analyze bishop e3? Ah, this move. So knight e3, there is this move. Okay. How does it work? Yeah, that it works, right. So let me see. King g4, knight d3, there is no tactics. Okay, fine. Yes. Okay, bishop e3 is okay move. And it seems that white should be doing something else. But white maybe can capture with that. What do you think? If now knight takes, then knight takes knight. There is still a pin. So bishop e3 still fails. Okay, a4, h4, bishop. Yeah, but it doesn't help because this rook isn't protected in that variation. Okay, so let's continue. What did happen? King e4, a takes b3. And we suggested that with 2 extra pawns, it's completely winning. The rest is just pure technique. So king bishop here, the knight moves to a4. Maybe to d5 was better, but the knight moves to a4 to protect here. Something like rook b3 here is a blunder. So knight a4, rook e3, trading rooks. And finally it was king, pawn takes g3. How does it work? Let me explain. So it's this third pawn. The king must take, but then it's e2. King f2 is already a blunder, so bishop c3 is a must. Still e1, bishop takes, knight takes, and this endgame is completely winning. So king here, check. This to stop, but the knight escapes and it's winning. We are able to capture this pawn while he captures our pawn on b2. So 2 connected pawns gonna decide the game. Okay, fine. So what I want you to remember, if you believe your position is advantageous, try to realize because of what you have advantage, what are these factors, and then decide how you can increase them or convert them to a different type of advantage. So if you have a permanent advantage, such as extra something, or even a bishop pair, try to open the position, simplify, and trade, and pass the game to the end game where you think you have better chances or your position is already winning. If you have an attack, do the attack, but don't obligatory, don't spend too much time on checkmating. If you see that you can convert your attack to extra material, just do it. Capture a piece and then finish the game in the end game. If you have material imbalances, ask yourself in which situation your material is better than the enemy material. So what makes your position stronger, and try to achieve it. And of course, don't trade pieces if you're not sure that these trades are favorable for you. So extra space, for example, can be converted. Extra space allows you to do an attack on two sides of the board, on the one side and the other side, and it's easier for you to maneuver pieces. So you can create weaknesses in the enemy camp and then win maybe a pawn or so. Okay, do you have any questions regarding our topic, regarding our workshop today? Okay, if not, let's finish. We will have the next workshop next Sunday, same time. I hope everyone can come. Okay, what do you want? Okay. The knight is pinned, so now let's play bishop g5 first. And then this and this, if the bishop takes, I mean. Which? Take. So bishop takes, you mean? Knight c6. Okay, I actually like this. No, 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 it's not the end. So, okay. Oh, wait a sec, wait a sec. Okay, okay. So rook d7, knight g5, h6, knight f3, and then I play so. Now, this is where black is almost winning if I. Okay, f6. Oh, I hang the rook, sorry. Okay, then I take here. And this fails. So if you want to take, you have to take with a knight. But then I can take the second pawn. No, with two pawns, it's winning. So bishop g5 refutes knight d2 strategy. Okay, fine. Thank you for coming, guys. So see you next Sunday, same time. Bye bye.